More than 4 billion people are either Christian or Muslim, nearly half the planet. And here is what almost no one stops to notice. The two religions begin in exactly the same place. They worship the same God of Abraham. They descend from the same father, Abraham. They honor the same virgin named Mary. They share prophets, they share stories, they share even the Garden of the Beginning, where a first man and a first woman lost everything. And yet they end up so far from one another that over a single man, they can never be reconciled. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand the 7 differences that truly separate them. Not the decorative ones, not the ones every video repeats, the deep ones, the ones that split history in two. And I'll warn you right now, the 7th is the most explosive of them all. And it's where almost everyone who hears it for the first time discovers something they didn't know. Because Islam teaches that Jesus never died on the cross, not that he was taken down in time, not that he survived the wounds, that he was never at all nailed to that wooden beam. 2 of these 7, what's more, you probably understand backwards, like almost everyone. And one of them has to do precisely with what Islam thinks of Jesus, which is nothing like what most people imagine. Before we begin, just one quick thing. If this is the first time you've landed here, I'm not asking you for anything. Watch the video, and if by the end something here gave you value, then you decide whether to leave your like. But if you've been here before, if what we do has added something to your life more than once, then yes, I'll ask you with confidence, 1-to-1, leave your like now. It's the only thing that tells the algorithm this is worth showing to someone else who's searching for exactly these answers. Done. Let's get back to it. Because to understand why 2 paths that start from the same point end up miles apart, you have to begin with the ground, with the foundation on which absolutely everything else is built. And that foundation is a single question. The oldest and the most dangerous of them all. Who is God? The first difference is born right there. Picture a simple house in a village in Israel thousands of years ago. Evening falls. A father gathers his children by the doorway, where there is a small case nailed to the frame with a few words inside, handwritten on parchment. And he recites, as his father recited, and his father's father, a sentence that this people carries engraved in its blood. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. One single God, without rival, without a second, without competition. From that house, from that sentence, Christianity is born. That's why the first thing you have to let go of is the idea that Christians worship 3 gods. It isn't so. Christianity is as fiercely monotheistic as its Jewish mother. It believes in one single God with the same intensity that Father believed it at the door of his house. And yet, Christianity adds something that splits history in 2. Something so bold it took centuries to find the words to say it, and cost entire councils, ferocious arguments, men exiled over a single letter of difference. What they said in the end was this, that one single God exists eternally as 3 distinct persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, not 3 gods, not a solitary God who sometimes puts on one mask and sometimes another, like an actor changing roles. 3 real persons, distinct, eternal, and one single divine essence shared among them. The first Christians fought over 2 Greek words so as not to get it wrong. What God is, the essence, they called one thing, and the who, each of the 3 persons, they called something else, one single what. 3 whos. And I'll be honest with you, because almost every video on this explains it badly. There is no example in this world that captures it completely. Whoever says the Trinity is like water, which is ice, steam, and liquid, is wrong, because water keeps changing form, whereas the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are all 3 things at once, always, without taking turns. That's why Christians don't call it a formula. They call it a mystery, something they confess, not something they can draw on a napkin. And I'm not exaggerating when I say the entire empire nearly broke apart over this. About 3 centuries after Christ, a preacher of enormous influence began teaching that the Son was not eternal, that there was a time when he did not exist, that he was the highest and most beautiful creature of God, but a creature in the end, not God himself. The idea spread like dry fire across the whole Christian world. To stop it, the emperor summoned hundreds of bishops from the farthest corners of the known world, gathered them in a single room, and out of it came the word that would set the course, one declaring that the Son is of the same substance as the Father. But, and almost no one tells this part, that council did not close the wound, it barely tore it fully open. Over the following decades, the Christian world ripped itself apart over a rival word, almost identical, differing from the first by a single letter of the Greek alphabet, the one that said instead that the Son was merely of a substance similar to the Father's. One letter of distance, whole emperors switched sides, exiled bishops, and brought them back depending on which of the 2 words they defended that year. And from that single letter hung the answer to the greatest question of all, whether Jesus was true God or only the most sublime of all creatures. That sharp, that real, that dangerous was the struggle to define who God is. Now leave that house in Israel and cross the desert. Travel hundreds of miles south to a city in Arabia and step into the heart of Islam. At the center of its most sacred mosque stands a cube of ancient granite, draped in black cloth, and embroidered on that cloth in gold thread is an idea that governs everything. God is absolutely one, indivisible, without parts, without partners, without anything or anyone at his side. Islam has a word for that pure oneness, the idea that God is one and nothing can be associated with him. And it has its shadow, too, the worst sin a human being can commit, graver than any crime, associating something with God, giving him a partner, splitting him. And for a Muslim, to say that God is Father, Son, and Spirit sounds exactly like that sin. It sounds like shattering the perfect unity of the 1 into 3. Do you grasp what just happened between those 2 scenes? The idea that for the Christian is the summit of all revelation, the highest thing that can be said of God, is for the Muslim the gravest of errors. They're not arguing over a detail. They disagree over the very first sentence of each faith, and everything that comes afterward, absolutely everything you're going to hear in this video, inherits that first fracture. Keep it close, because it's going to come back. Which brings us hand in hand to the second difference, and this is one of the 2 I told you probably understand backwards: who Jesus is. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it silently before going on. Do you think Islam despises Jesus, that it ignores him, treats him as a minor figure, almost a nuisance? A lot of people take that for granted, and it's exactly the opposite. Islam honors Jesus in a way that leaves almost any Christian who discovers it for the first time speechless. The Quran affirms that he was born of a virgin without a human father, just as the Gospels tell it. It devotes an entire chapter to his mother, with her name written at the top. It says Jesus performed miracles, that he healed those born blind, that he gave life back to the dead by God's permission. It calls him a word that came from God, a spirit from him. And it goes even further, to places that surprise even many Muslims by name. The Quran tells that, as a newborn, when the neighbors pointed at Mary and accused her of having a child without a husband, the baby Jesus spoke from the cradle to defend his mother, declaring himself a servant of God. And it narrates something even more astonishing, that Jesus, already grown, took clay in his hands, shaped it like a bird, breathed over it, and the clay flew off, turned into a living bird, all by God's permission. Stop and think about it. That is not the portrait of just any prophet, lost among the crowd of the messengers. It is the portrait of a unique figure, surrounded by signs no other prophet of Islam has. That's why what comes next is so disconcerting, because after exalting him so high, Islam draws a line that may not be crossed under any circumstance. And here comes the fact almost no one knows, the one that demolishes the idea that Islam treats him like anyone else. The Quran gives Jesus a title it never gives Muhammad. It calls him the Messiah. Stop on that, because it matters and because almost everyone tells it wrong. If you've seen videos claiming that for Islam the role of Messiah belongs to Muhammad, they're wrong, with no qualifications. In Islam, the Messiah is Jesus. Muhammad never receives that title. What Islam denies Jesus is not the honor, nor the miracles, nor the miraculous birth. It denies him one single thing, the greatest of all. It denies that he is God. Because for Christianity, Jesus is not one great prophet among others. The fourth gospel opens with a sentence that is, perhaps, the most audacious ever written by a human hand. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And a few lines later, the blow, and the Word became flesh. Read it slowly. It means that the eternal God, the same one who lit the stars and measured the oceans in the palm of his hand, entered his own creation, not as a king with an army, as a newborn shivering with cold in the arms of a teenage girl. For the Christian, to look at the face of Jesus is to look at the face of God. For Islam, that is simply impossible. There is a very short chapter of the Quran, just 4 lines, that Muslims recite over and over throughout their lives, and that says of God, He neither begets nor is begotten. Read it again. It's almost as if it answers word for word the Christian idea of the Son of God. God has no children. God is not born of anyone, nor does he cause anyone to be born of himself. Jesus, says Islam, was a servant, an extraordinary prophet, perhaps the closest to heaven of all, who came before the last one. But a man whom people, over the centuries, ended up mistakenly turning into something he never claimed to be. And now, get ready for something almost dizzying, one of those things they don't teach you in class. Both religions expect Jesus to return. Christianity awaits the return of the Son of God, who will descend to judge the living and the dead. And Islam, in its tradition, also teaches that Jesus will come back in the last days before the end. The same man, the same return, awaited by billions of people on both sides. And yet, when those feet touch the earth again, according to each faith, they'll be doing almost opposite things. For one, God himself returns to reign. For the other, a human prophet returns, who, among other things, will come to correct those who made the mistake of worshipping him. Do you see how deep the wound goes? It's not whether Jesus existed. On that they agree. It's not whether he was important. On that too. The fracture is in a single word, the word the whole of Christianity hangs from. Is he God or only a man? If you get that one wrong, says the Christian, you lose everything. If you get it right the way they get it right, says the Muslim, you give God back his throne and stop breaking him into pieces. The same person. Two answers that cannot coexist. And that question about Jesus won't be settled today between us, but it's going to return with all its force at the end, in the 7th difference, when we reach the wooden beam. For now, keep it next to the first. Because if the two faiths say such opposite things about God and about Jesus, a question forces itself upon us, and it's the third difference. Where did each one get its ideas? Where does each book come from? And here the two paths could not be more different, not in their form, nor in their origin. The Christian Bible did not fall from heaven finished, bound, ready. Picture instead a cathedral built over more than 1,000 years, stone upon stone, generation after generation. Dozens of different hands raised its walls. Shepherds who smelled of sheep, kings in their palaces, an educated physician, fishermen with no schooling, men in chains in a prison, others weeping in exile far from their land. And they did not all write the same thing nor in the same way. There is poetry, and there are lists of families. There are burning love songs and laments of a grief that splits the soul. There are war chronicles and intimate letters. For the Christian, all of it is inspired by God, yes, but it breathes through real people. That's why the letter of an impassioned Paul, who writes almost at the top of his lungs, doesn't sound the same as the calm, orderly chronicle of a Luke who investigates like a historian. God speaks, Christians say, but he lets the human voice of whoever holds the pen be heard. The fingerprint of the man is on every page, and that for them is not a flaw, it's part of the miracle. Now cross over again and feel how everything changes. The Quran was not born from dozens of hands over 1,000 years. It was born from a single man in little more than 20 years of his life. And here is the difference that changes everything. For Islam, the Quran was not inspired. It was dictated. Go back in time and step into the scene. A narrow cave on a bare mountain on the outskirts of a city of merchants. A man of about 40 has withdrawn there, as he often did, to be alone, to think, to flee for a few days from the noise of commerce and the idols of his people. According to Islamic tradition, the very air suddenly grows dense. An overwhelming presence wraps around him, and a voice shakes him with a single command. Recite. The man, whom tradition describes as orphaned since childhood and unable to read or write, answers in terror that he does not know how, and the voice insists, presses him, commands again. That, they say, is the first of hundreds of revelations that will descend upon him for the rest of his life, in the city and in exile, in victory and in flight. And for the Muslim, what that man transmitted did not carry a single word of his own. Not an opinion, not a memory, not a personal flourish, not an added emotion. It was the very speech of God, eternal, without beginning, existing even before the world existed, descended intact to the earth through a messenger who only repeated. That's why it is recited aloud with an almost trembling care, guarding every syllable. And that's why many insist that only in its original Arabic does it keep all its force, because to translate it for them is already to step one pace away from the exact sound of the voice of God. The very word they use for their book means, precisely, the recitation. Oh, and here is a detail almost no one tells, one that makes the story even more concrete. While that man lived, those revelations were not gathered into a single book. They lived, above all, in the memory of his followers, who recited them by heart, and in loose pieces that someone jotted down wherever they could. Dry palm leaves, flat scraps of stone, pieces of leather, even the broad bones from the backs of camels. When the man died, the problem appeared all at once. Many of those who knew the entire text by heart began to die in the battles, and the community felt panic at losing, with each death, a piece of the voice of God. So, one generation later, under the third great leader who succeeded the prophet, an order was given to gather everything, compare it, and fix a single official written version. And so that no doubt and no differing copy would remain in circulation. The versions that did not match were burned. From that effort, the book was born as it is recited today, identical from one end of the Islamic world to the other. Look then at what happens when a Christian and a Muslim open their sacred book in the morning. They are not doing the same thing, even though it looks like it. The Christian reads the story of God, narrated by men whom God chose and moved. The Muslim recites the direct words of God, with no man standing between heaven and the page. Two ideas so different of what it means for God to speak that they change even the way the pages are turned, even the way of breathing while reading. And this pushes us inevitably toward the fourth difference, because if the Quran arrived through that man in the cave, we have to ask who he was exactly for each of the two religions. And the answer opens an abyss once again. That man is Muhammad, and his place changes everything. For Islam, Muhammad is the last link in a very long chain of prophets. And pay attention to this chain, because it's full of names you'd recognize at once. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and yes, Jesus too. Islam does not believe it brought a new religion into the world. It believes the exact opposite, that it came to restore the original and true religion, the same one all those prophets preached, pure submission to the one God, which over the centuries had been bending, deforming, growing contaminated in the mouths of its followers. And to Muhammad it gives a unique title, a powerful image. It calls him the seal of the prophets. Think about what a seal means. It's the drop of hot wax that closes a letter, the final mark that says, this ends here, nothing more is added. Muhammad, for Islam, seals prophecy. After him, God sends no one else. The message is complete, the door has closed, and Islamic tradition exalts this man to dizzying heights. It tells that one night before dawn, he was awakened and taken on an impossible journey. Mounted on a swift, luminous creature, he was said to have been carried in an instant from the sacred city of Arabia to distant Jerusalem, and from there raised up through the heavens, one after another. And in that ascent, according to the account, he kept finding in each heaven the great prophets who had come before him, Adam, Moses, Abraham, and Jesus as well. And here is the detail that says it all, the one that sums up his place in a single image. On that journey, tradition affirms that it was Muhammad who led all those prophets in prayer, all of them behind him at the front, the last of the chain, leading all those before him. From that journey, the account adds, he came back with the exact number of daily prayers a Muslim prays to this day, fixed after a negotiation with God, in which Moses himself advised him to ask, again and again, that they be fewer. And I owe you, as always, the other side, because you want the truth and not the brochure. That night journey, so central to Muslim devotion, rests above all on the accounts of tradition, and not on the main body of the Quran. And Muslims themselves have argued for centuries over something that is no small matter, whether it was a real journey in flesh and bone or a spiritual vision while he slept. One of the Prophet's wives went so far as to say that his body never moved from the bed that night. Others insist it was as physical as any dirt road. Once again, not even within Islam is everything settled. And for Islam, the arrival of Muhammad was not a surprise fallen out of nowhere. They hold that the earlier prophets had already announced him, and that even Jesus himself foretold a messenger who would come after him, one whose name in the tradition meant the praised one. Some go further still and claim that when Jesus, in the Gospel, promised his disciples a comforter who would come after his departure, he was in fact announcing Muhammad, and that the original word was altered over time. And here I have to be honest and skeptical with you, because you want the truth and not the propaganda of any side. That last claim is rejected by the overwhelming majority of scholars, because neither the oldest texts nor the language they were written in support it. The word Jesus used means defender, helper, and Christians always understood it as the Holy Spirit, not as a man who would arrive 6 centuries later. But notice the size of what's at stake. The two religions come to fight even over this, over whether Jesus announced a future prophet or announced the Spirit of God. Even in a single promise, made on a single night, the paths split in two again. Now cross over to the Christian side and listen to the silence, because here Muhammad simply does not appear, not because he is attacked with fury, but for something deeper. The logic of Christianity leaves him not a single gap to fit into. Remember what we saw in the second difference. If Jesus was not one more prophet, but God himself made flesh, then the revelation of God did not reach its highest point in a later messenger. It reached its highest point in a person, in Jesus. And if the summit was already reached, no one can come afterward, 600 years later, with a message that is even more complete and definitive. There is no floor above the rooftop. There is no chapter after the end. Do you feel the head-on collision? For one religion, the most important messenger in history arrived 6 centuries after Jesus to correct a lost course and close the book of Revelation forever. For the other, everything necessary had already been said, and more than said, lived and bled, in a single man. They are not arguing over the merits of a person. They disagree over something enormous, whether the story of salvation was left open forever or whether it closed 2,000 years ago. And once again, notice, everything brings you back to the same question about Jesus. We've covered 4 differences now, and if you've made it this far, you already hold in your hands the entire skeleton of the dispute. Who God is, who Jesus is, where the book comes from and who the last prophet was. But now we're going to come down from heaven to something much closer, much more intimate, much more yours. Because the 3 differences that remain are no longer about distant theology. They're about you, about what you are on the inside, about how you're saved, and about what happened, or didn't happen, on a hill one Friday at noon. And since you're already looking at this subject with more depth than most people, let me ask you for it here, at this exact point. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Because every week we take apart a subject like this, layer by layer, without fear of the uncomfortable questions. Done. Let's keep going. Now it gets personal. The 5th difference is this. What are you born with? Christianity teaches something uncomfortable, almost offensive to the modern ear. It teaches that you are born already broken. It gives it a name you've heard 1,000 times without fully understanding it. Original sin. The idea is this. When the first human being rebelled against God back in the Garden of the Beginning, he did not wound only himself. He cracked the nature of all humanity that would come after him, like a poisoned spring at the source of a river, from which downstream all the waters and all the generations drink. That's why one of the letters of the New Testament says it without dodging. Through one single man, sin entered the world, and along with sin, death entered. Read the order of things carefully, because that's where the scandalous part is. It's not that you do bad things and therefore become a sinner. It is, says Christianity, that you are already born with the inclination bent inward, and that's why, afterward, you do evil. The disease comes before the symptoms. You are born already broken on the inside, and only afterward does that break become visible in what you do. Islam looks at that same newborn and sees exactly the opposite. There is no original sin, none. The baby who comes into the world is born pure, clean, in a natural state of inclination toward God, like a page still blank. No one inherits anyone's guilt. The error of that first man was his and his alone. He acknowledged it, he repented, God forgave him, and right there the matter ended, leaving no stain on his descendants. Each person begins life with the accounts at 0, and therefore, each person answers only for what they themselves choose to do. You don't carry on your back the weight of any ancestor. You carry only your own, and that is already enough. And here is a twist in the story that almost no one knows, and that's going to unsettle you. This Christian idea of inherited sin was not defined from the very first day. It was sharpened some 4 centuries after Christ in a ferocious dispute between a bishop of North Africa and a monk who taught the exact opposite. That monk held that the human being is born with the account at 0, with no inherited guilt, and that he can choose the good by his own will, with no need for any supernatural rescue. The Church condemned him as a heretic and sealed the doctrine of original sin forever. But look closely at what that monk taught, because the heart of his idea resembles in an unsettling way what Islam would affirm centuries later. You are born clean, you are capable, you answer for your own acts, choose well, and you will live. In other words, an idea that Christianity threw out the back door as a dangerous error came back later, through the front door, turned into one of the pillars of another of the world's great religions. The same question about the human being, answered in the two opposite ways, separated by centuries and by deserts. Stop a moment to feel the enormous distance between these two images of the human being, because it isn't a technicality. It's the image each faith has of you when you look at yourself in the mirror. The Christian looks and sees someone who needs to be rescued from a condition he was already born trapped in, someone who cannot save himself, no matter how hard he tries. The Muslim looks in that same mirror and sees someone healthy, capable, worthy, fully responsible, who needs not rescue but direction, who only has to choose well and straighten the path. Two opposite diagnoses of the same patient. And you are the patient. You already know what happens when two doctors don't agree on the diagnosis. It's impossible for them to agree on the cure. And that cure is the sixth difference. And it's, in practice, the one that touches your life the most each day, each decision, each night. You wonder whether you're right with God. How exactly is a person saved? Close your eyes for a second and picture a scale. An old set of scales with two pans hanging from chains, like the scales of justice. In Islam, that image is at the center of everything. Its teaching describes a final day on which the deeds of every human being will be weighed, literally placed on a scale before God. On one pan, all the good you did in your life. On the other, all the evil. And your fate will depend in large part on which of the two pans weighs more in the end, always under the mercy of a God who forgives whom he wills. And the scene that tradition paints of that day is overwhelming. Each human being will receive the complete record of his life, the entire book of everything he did, and the very way he receives it will already announce his fate. In the right hand, the one who is saved. In the left hand, or behind his back, the one who is lost. And beyond the scale, according to the account, all will have to cross a bridge stretched over the fire. A bridge that for the righteous will be wide and firm, and for the rest, they say, thinner than a hair and sharper than the edge of a sword. Those who manage to cross enter, those who don't fall. But here I have to be fair to Islam because the simplistic version going around betrays it. It's not a cold calculation of moral arithmetic. It's not just adding the good and subtracting the bad, as in a cash register. Above the scale, there is always decisively the mercy of God, who forgives whom he wills and how he wills. In fact, there is a very well-known saying attributed to the Prophet himself, which affirms that no one, absolutely no one, will enter paradise by his deeds alone, not even him, unless God covers him with his mercy. So here too, the believer doesn't buy heaven with a simple list of merits, but look at the difference, which is subtle and at the same time enormous. Even with all that mercy, in Islam, your deeds enter the scale. They truly count. They weigh. They're part of the final reckoning. The question that stays on the table remains, in large measure, what did you do with your life? That's why the life of the Muslim is held up by practices that are not optional, that structure each day and each year. The declaration that there is no God but God and that Muhammad is his messenger. Prayer turned toward a single holy city several times a day. Fasting for an entire month, giving a portion of one's wealth to the poor. And, at least once in a lifetime, the pilgrimage to that holy city. The very word with which Islam names itself means submission. You are saved by submitting to the will of God and filling day after day that pan of good until it weighs more than the other. Salvation is, in large measure, something that is built, something earned with an entire life. And here Christianity says something that, to the ear of any human being, sounds almost too easy to be true. It says that you cannot fill that pan, that no quantity of good works, however enormous, is ever enough to close the gap you were born with. One of Paul's letters affirms it without hesitation. By grace you are saved, through faith, and this does not come from you. It is not the result of your works, so that no one at all can boast before God. The word that changes everything is that one, grace, a gift, something that by definition is not earned and not deserved. Because the moment you earn it, it stops being a gift and becomes a wage. Christianity teaches that salvation is not a salary you collect at the end of the month for your good behavior, but a gift you receive with empty, open hands, with nothing to offer in return. The good works don't disappear, mind you, but they change place entirely. They are no longer the price you pay for God to accept you, but the grateful fruit of the one who has already been accepted, and out of pure love, can't help loving back. The clearest picture the Gospels paint of this is not that of a saint, but that of a dying criminal. Beside Jesus, that noon on the hill, there were two more condemned men, nailed up like him. And one of them, in his last hours of life, with no time left to do a single good work, with nothing to put on any pan of any scale, with not one merit to show, barely turns his head toward the man nailed at his side and asks him for one single thing, that he remember him. And the answer, according to the Gospel of Luke, comes at once, without conditions, without a to-do list. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Today, without works, without a scale, without time to mend anything, only grace in the last hour of an entire wasted life. For the logic of the Islamic scale, that scene is almost unthinkable. A man saved with the pan, completely empty. And for Christianity, that scene is the whole gospel summed up in a single breath. And I want to be fair with you, because within Christianity itself there are real nuances, and to hide them from you would be to deceive you. There are traditions that stress faith alone, almost entirely alone, and others that insist that true faith has to prove itself in concrete works and in the sacraments, or it isn't real faith. That argument is old and still alive. But beneath all the nuances, the axis of the contrast stands firm as a column. On one side, a scale that coldly weighs what you did. On the other, a cross that pays what you could never pay. And I've just spoken the word cross. Because this entire difference about salvation, this whole abyss over how you're saved, rests in the end on a single event. An event that Christianity places at the absolute center of the universe, the axis on which the whole of history turns, and that Islam, in its most widespread reading, says simply never happened. We arrive at the seventh, the one I promised you from the very first second, the one that lights up the comments most every time it's touched. Take a deep breath, because this one is big, and because here there's a truth almost no one dares to tell in full. It's noon on a bare hill on the outskirts of Jerusalem. The air is dry and smells of dust and hot metal. For Christianity, what happens on this hill is the most important moment in all of human history, and it's worth telling it as it truly was, without the softness of the paintings made 1,000 years later. The Romans did not nail their condemned through the palms of the hands, as so many paintings show. The soft flesh of the palm would tear under the weight of a body hanging for hours. The nails went through higher up in the area of the wrists, between the bones of the forearm, able to hold a man alive and conscious for a cruel stretch of time. And many times there wasn't even an elegant cross of 4 arms, like the one you imagine. Often it was a beam in the shape of a T or a simple vertical post driven into the ground. It was the most humiliating and most painful method of execution the Roman Empire had designed, deliberately reserved for slaves and for rebels, meant not only to kill, but to terrify everyone who passed by looking. And that a man named Jesus died in that way is not merely an article of Christian faith. A Roman historian who had no interest whatsoever in defending the Christians, named Tacitus, left it written that a certain Christ had been executed under the governor Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. He did not write it with sympathy. He wrote it in passing, almost with contempt while speaking of a bothersome sect, and precisely for that reason it counts as a witness. For the vast majority of historians, believers or not, the crucifixion of Jesus is one of the best established facts of all antiquity, not because of faith, because of the evidence. And there's a very concrete reason why even the most skeptical historians accept it, a reason worth knowing because it's pure logic. No movement trying to convince the world that its leader was the promised king, the anointed of God, would ever invent for him the most shameful and accursed death that existed. The very scriptures of that people declared, "Cursed everyone who hung from a wooden beam." No one who wants to sell a hero invents on top of it the one detail that most destroys his own message. It makes no sense to fabricate precisely the thing that shames you most. And that's why exactly the scholars conclude it wasn't invented. Because if they told it, despite how humiliating it was, the most probable thing, by an enormous margin, is that it truly happened. And for Christianity, that absolute horror is, at the same time, paradoxically, the best news the world has ever received. Another letter of the New Testament describes Jesus voluntarily stripping himself of his divine glory, taking the form of a servant, becoming obedient to the extreme of death, and nothing less than death on a cross. The debt you were born with, that impossible account you could never pay on any scale, Christianity says he paid it there, in your place, nailed to that beam. And 3 days later, according to the Gospels, the tomb dawned empty and the stone was rolled away. Paul stakes absolutely everything on a single card when he writes that if Christ did not truly rise, then the entire Christian faith is hollow, empty, useless, and Christians are the most pitiable of all men. Understand it well. Without the cross and without the empty tomb, Christianity doesn't weaken a little. It collapses entirely, down to the foundations. Nothing is left standing. Now hold on, because here comes the blow that gives this video its name. Islam looks at that same hill, that same beam, that same noon, and says it didn't happen. There is a verse in the Quran that touches it directly. It says about the enemies of Jesus, that they did not kill him nor crucify him, but it only appeared so to them. And in the most widespread reading, the one most Muslim scholars have held for centuries, that means the following: someone was crucified on that hill that day, but it was not Jesus. To the eyes of the crowd, it only seemed so because God is said to have placed the face of Jesus over another man or confused everyone's sight. God, says this reading, would never allow one of his greatest prophets to end up hanging like a criminal in plain view of all. So, at the last instant, he rescued him. He raised him up to himself, and the cross, from the beginning, was empty of him. Some later traditions even tried to put a name to the man who took his place on the beam. Some said it was the traitor, the disciple, who had handed him over, receiving his punishment that way. Others pointed to the man who had been forced to carry the cross along the road. But it's worth being honest with you. None of those stories rests on the text of the Quran itself, which gives no name and no detail. They are late attempts by the commentators to fill a silence, to tell what the book leaves untold. And that already gives us a hint of how slippery the ground is. But here is the truth almost no video dares to tell you in full. And that changes the whole weight of this difference. That reading, however dominant it may be, is not the only one within Islam itself. The matter hangs from a single Arabic phrase, extremely brief, that is famously ambiguous. So much so that scholars themselves have been arguing over it for centuries. And there are respected Muslim scholars, not enemies of Islam, but voices from within, who hold something different. That the phrase does not deny that Jesus died, but denies that his enemies truly triumphed over him. That the verse is not speaking of history or of medicine, but of pride. That those who believed they had defeated the messenger of God by nailing him to a stake deceived themselves, because God is not conquered with nails. For these voices, what only appeared so to them was not the death, but the victory. Stop on what this means, because it's enormous. The most explosive disagreement between Christianity and Islam, the one about the cross, isn't even fully settled within Islam itself. It's not only a wall between two religions, it's a fissure running through the middle of one of them. And that, far from making the subject smaller, makes it much more serious, because it forces you to think instead of repeating. And even so, with all the nuances laid out on the table, the central contrast remains, and it's brutal. For Christianity, on that cross, the salvation of all humanity was decided. Without it, nothing is left. For the majority reading of Islam, on that cross there was from the start no one to save, because Jesus was never there. Put those two sentences side by side and look at the abyss between them. It's not a detail of the calendar or a difference of customs. It's the most important event of one of these religions, denied at the root by the other. The whole dispute about sin, about salvation, about who Jesus is, about who God is, all of it concentrates, tightens, and explodes at this single point. A wooden beam, a noon, and two enormous peoples who will never agree on what truly happened there. And those are the 7 differences that truly matter. Who God is, who Jesus is, where the book comes from, who the last prophet was, what you're born with, how you're saved, and the cross. But I'm going to be honest with you, because you deserve the complete truth. Not even these 7 exhaust the entire distance between the two. There are more, and they're worth knowing. And one of them, in fact, is as deep as the 7 great ones, because it touches once again the very heart of who God is, the Holy Spirit. For Christianity, the Holy Spirit is not an energy, nor an impersonal force, nor a symbol of religious fervor. It is the third person of that one God, as fully God as the Father and as the Son. It is God himself coming to live inside the believer, so close that you no longer need to climb to any temple or cross any desert to find him, because he dwells in the chest of the one who believes. Islam also uses those same words, Holy Spirit, because they appear in its book, but it gives them an entirely different meaning. In the most widespread reading, that Holy Spirit is not God in any way, but the messenger angel, the same created creature that descended to the cave and dictated the revelation to the prophet. Measure the distance between the two ideas. For one, the Holy Spirit is God dwelling inside you, closer to you than your own breath. For the other, it's an angel, a glorious servant but a creature in the end, who delivered a book and went away. Once again, the same first fracture, the one about what can or cannot be part of God, opening now in a new place. And there are still other differences, quicker, but just as real. The Muslim orders his entire day around prayer, turned toward a single city, fasts a whole month every year, and follows precise rules about what he can and cannot eat. The ordinary Christian in general carries none of those ritual obligations and eats freely. Even the place of Mary shifts, most highly honored by both faiths, but with a different weight on each altar, and on what happens after death. The details of paradise, of the scale, of who can intercede for whom on the final day. The two maps of the beyond separate again and draw different landscapes. And here, I want to know what you think, because the conversation we have down in the comments usually teaches me as much as the video itself. Of all these differences, which one took you by surprise? The one where Islam calls Jesus the Messiah and honors his mother, the one about the cross, and that debate not even Islam itself has settled. Write it down below. I read it. Because at the end of it all, after the 7 great ones and the small ones, After the scales and the pillars and the prophets and the books, the entire weight of this immense division comes to rest once again on a single question. The same one we began with a while ago. The same one a merchant answered one way in a dark cave, and a carpenter answered another way with his own blood on a hill lit by the noonday sun. Who do you say that man from Nazareth is? A prophet, glorious, honored, awaited for the end of time. But in the end, a man like you, or God himself, with the dust of the road on his feet and iron in his wrists. There is no middle ground, there is no third door, and on your answer to that single question, in the silence of your own chest, hangs absolutely everything else. And if that question left you thinking, don't leave it there. There's another video waiting for you on the screen right now. It's not the second part of this one. It's another story complete on its own that confronts head-on something you probably also thought you had settled. It's right there, one click away. Hit play and let's keep thinking together.